We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you. Thank you. Before I do anything else, I just want to say thank you so much to you all for being here. It's a weekday. Every single one of you has a choice of where you could be right now, but you, like I do, understand the importance of this moment and the importance of our students and the importance of making sure students are taken care of, and the fact that you chose to be here instead of watching television, grading papers, lesson planning, or whatever else means the world to me. A lot of you have thanked me for organizing this, but I didn't organize anything. I just put up the bat signal and utilized my social media following. The real organizers of this are my Lincoln High School family. And so if you're a Lincoln staff member who helped organize this, please stand up. And honestly, the most important person in organizing this is my wife, who, when I said everybody stand up, stood pointing at other people like her humility is off the charts. Anyway, that's my home maintenance. My name is Nate Bowling. I'm the 2016 Washington State Teacher of the Year, but more importantly, I'm a member of the Lincoln High School staff and family and a resident of Tacoma, and I want to welcome you to our Teacher Town Hall. Before we get started, I want to allow the president of my union, Angel Morton, who offered us this space, to offer some remarks.
We are so happy to have you all here tonight, and I know that as adults, me and my friends wake up with a pit in our stomach often, and I can't imagine how kids feel in these days that are pretty crazy. I know I've heard from some of the teachers in our district who have little ones who are afraid to go home after school because they're not sure if their mom and dad are going to be there because they pay enough attention to what's going on in the news that they're afraid. And so as educators, it's up to us to make sure we provide that safe space for kids and that we figure out how to love on them and support them and let them know there's hope and that we're going to do everything in our power to work to support them. We know that the Washington State Constitution guarantees public education to every student, doesn't ask for any proof of anything. All students come, all students get educated, and I think everybody in this room goes above and beyond. The students come to you and you educate them and you care for them and you support them, and I thank you for that. So tonight we just want to hear more specifically about how we can support our kids and keep things moving along and hopefully turn things to a more optimistic note in our society. So thanks for coming.
Okay, time for a couple of announcements that are generational. If you need a restroom, the restroom is right there. So there's a ladies' room and a men's room there. And if you're Twitter inclined, and want to tweet anything out you're hearing tonight, we're using hashtag #TACTownHall. Is that correct? Okay, so hashtag #TACTownHall for the conversation. What I want to do is give a little bit of background to our conversation and why we're here before we start with the panel. And I would say that like many of you, I watched the election and I went, that's interesting. That's going to change some things. But I'm not sure I understood to the degree in which things would change for some of my students. And what I've watched is basically since January and the inauguration, wave after wave of my students has had their sense of safety disrupted. So I have Muslim students who have parents who are maybe out of the country this time, who were told for a period of time their parents couldn't come home. I have transgender students who were told by the administration that, we're going to take away protections for you that we've had in the past. And the idea of taking away protections, hits me at my core for a lot of different reasons. And most importantly, we've had my students who are undocumented, or worse, my students who are citizens, but have family members who are undocumented, who have been impacted. And I've been just saying to anybody to listen to me, and I'm going to say it to you all tonight, when our students don't feel safe, it impacts their learning. And our students right now, many of our students do not feel safe. And so for me, I'm a teacher at heart, it's what I do. I eat, sleep, live this crap. What I've done is I have a learning target for tonight. Well, and actually maybe not a learning target, essential question we're going to conquer. So the essential question is basically, how can we, as professional educators, ensure that our students feel safe with us while informing them of their rights and their protections? And in order to facilitate that conversation, I have three guests here. I have Tim Warden-Hertz from the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project. And so Tim's going to be talking about the rights that immigrants have. Over here, I have Vanessa Hernandez from the ACLU, and she'll be touching on the rights that immigrants have and also the rights of as professionals. And then lastly, I have what I love to have met is a former student of my wife, Cynthia Lejean Vasquez, and she's from the Washington Dream Coalition. Let's give them all a round of applause. And so what we want to do today is have about a 30, 40-minute panel from them, and then we'll take your questions, and then I'd like to get everybody out of here so you can, go have dinner or cocktails, whatever your thing is, by about 7:20, 7:30. Sound good? But I and myself, and I'm going to volunteer them too, are willing to stick around afterwards and take questions that you may have. Fair? All right. So I would just like if each one of you could kind of start by explaining what your organization does, and how you can be a resource to the people in this room right now, assuming that most of them are educators.
Alphabetical order, so I guess I'll go first. I'm Vanessa Hernandez. I'm the Youth Policy Director with the ACLU of Washington. So I do the ACLU's legislative and policy work around education and juvenile justice. Sometimes that means I'm in Olympia lobbying for better laws, and sometimes it means that I'm honestly just advising parents and students and teachers and school boards and superintendents about their legal obligations and best practices. The ACLU is probably best known for our litigation. But I don't work on the litigation end of the office. My goal is to help empower folks to fix those problems, whatever that is. So I'm always available as a resource for teachers and for schools and for students and families.
And hello, everyone. Like Nathan said, my name is Cynthia Lejean Vasquez. I am a former student with the Clover Park School District, so just a little bit south from here, and also a core leader of the Washington Dream Coalition. We are a youth-led, undocumented-led advocacy coalition from campus and groups from Seattle all the way to Spokane. We focus on advocacy to ensure that just immigration policies are happening. We're also an affiliate of United We Dream, which is the largest national undocumented advocacy group across the state. And with that, we're a part of an advisory council that puts together curriculum for educators on how to best support undocumented students. We are also leaders with 2 state or nationwide campaigns. One is Educators Coming Out Day, and the other one is Institution Coming Out Day. And essentially, it is whether at the individual level as educators or at a national institutional level, coming out in support for undocumented students and ensuring that the locations where you are in are, again, just and pro-immigrant.
My name's Tim. NERP does a lot of different things. The majority of our work is direct representation for folks across. We have 4 offices, one in Tacoma, Seattle, Wenatchee, and Granger. So we represent folks who are facing deportation, folks who are looking to find a way to legalize their status, and folks who are trying to help family members as well. And we also do impact litigation work. We also enjoy suing Donald Trump and have done so. And if something comes out again on Wednesday, we will do so again. But and then we also do a lot of community education around the state, which is obviously something that's picked up a lot in the recent weeks, and we will continue to do that. And so in terms of sort of what you guys can look for from us, I mean, we are sort of the only comprehensive immigration legal service provider in the state, and so I think if folks are low income and have immigration questions, I think we're certainly a resource there. I sort of, as I'm sure you can imagine, there is a lot of demand for our services, and so I can't promise that we get to everyone right away, but we do our best to try to get through as many folks as we can and make sure folks get an intake and a chance to really understand what their options might be. And and I think one of the sort of tragedies of life, but of immigration law is that a certain number of folks don't have options, but some do. And I think one of the things that we really try to get out of sort of this increased awareness around immigration, increased outreach that we're doing around immigration, is that folks who may not have sort of thought to go ask questions or thought to maybe see if there might be options for them, that they maybe are really feeling now, right, as part of this sort of fear. They really are going out and talking to folks and maybe identifying an option for them, not only to find sort of short-term answers, but maybe hopefully, right, a long-term path to status. And so hopefully we can offer some information around that tonight. But again, referring folks to us is an option as well. So thanks.
So Vanessa, I want to go to you if you don't mind. Could you just talk about what has immigration enforcement been up until now? And then there's a lot of rumors out there. So like I saw the reports about the school bus in Austin, right? Could you talk about what has changed recently? How the landscape's changed, please?
One of the first things that I think it's important for folks to know is that it's not as if immigration enforcement has just started now, right? The Obama administration led one of the largest ramp-ups in immigration enforcement in our nation's history and deported historically large numbers of people. What I think has changed, though, is a general atmosphere of fear and a sense, and Tim can certainly speak to this in greater depth, but that the net has widened in terms of who is perceived as a priority for immigration. So President Trump put out some executive orders at the beginning of his term, actually before the Muslim ban order, that set a almost frankly limitless list of priorities of folks who were being targeted for immigration enforcement. Under the Obama administration, the line that the Obama administration liked to use was felons, not families. Essentially attempting at least to try to prioritize folks who had been convicted of certain crimes for deportation enforcement. The Trump administration's line is anyone who has committed any activity that could be considered a crime, anyone who has been charged with but not convicted of a crime, anyone who has been convicted of any crime whatsoever. That is a massive number of people. And even though, sorry, do you want to?
No. And I think truthfully I think that one of the pieces that I think is sort of, I think even goes broader, right, is that they define, they use these terms, right? Like criminal has become this word that means so much more than I think maybe the common parlance means. And so, I think, right, and I think the way that we read that, and it seems like ICE will read that, is essentially everyone is, right? Because it's a federal misdemeanor to have entered the United States without documentation, and so therefore everyone, right, who has is essentially a criminal, right? So
legally isn't true, right? Legally, you can be present in the country without having committed any crime, but that is not a nuance that is in these orders.
Agreed. So I guess I agree with, in some sense, right, that it is the priority is that there is no more priorities, right?
Yep. In terms of what that means for schools, right, the direct day-to-day, are you going to start seeing immigration raids in schools? The answer so far is probably not, but exercise vigilance, right? And this is an area where I struggle with how to frame this for folks. The Department of Homeland Security promulgated in 2011 internal guidance memos that says that ICE will not engage in enforcement activities, and that means any enforcement activity. It means arrest, surveillance, questioning, detention in quote-unquote sensitive locations. So that's that little flyer with the pretty little graphics, right? And among those sensitive locations are schools. Neither the executive order that the president signed nor the enforcement memos that were signed by the DHS secretary rescind that guidance affirmatively. There were, though, leaked drafts of guidance which would have rescinded all Obama era, actually all prior guidance on immigration and customs enforcement. And so the actual drafts that got signed, the actual memos that got signed, simply rescinded contradictory guidance, but it isn't clear yet how DHS is going to determine what's contradictory and what's not. Some of the administration's public statements have been that the sensitive locations guidance remains in effect. That said, though, the sensitive locations guidance has limits, right? It does not protect, for example, students who are on their way to the school bus. It doesn't protect students who are driving themselves to school. It prevents DHS from routinely conducting enforcement activities on school campus. But that is as far as it goes. And again, that's internal guidance, which means that it could get rescinded. I have no reason to believe that's going to happen in the immediate future, but that's where things are.
Also, in addition, I think like Tim mentioned something really important, right, is the expanded criminalization of our communities. What it means to be a quote-unquote criminal has expanded. In addition to that, it's also really important to note that some of the memos include hiring more enforcement agents, right, and that's something that a lot of our communities are fearing at the moment. It also, in certain cases, of deportation process, in addition to enlisting local law enforcement in, certain states to help make arrests on behalf of the Department of Homeland Security as well.
And I'm glad you're with the microphone now, because I was going to you next. Just show of hands, the DACA program is? Dope. Okay.
Lovely.
Right. So could you talk about what is happening, or could happen, or is projected to happen, or you suspect is going to happen, or are terrified is going to happen, or theorize might happen? You understand with DACA, please?
I think so. So currently, like a really brief level overview of what the DACA program is. In 2012, President Barack Obama signed an executive that essentially allowed undocumented youth that met certain requirements to receive work authorization along with social. And this expanded allowed employment, and like full disclosure, because of that I'm able to work where I work now, because if it wasn't for that I wouldn't. In addition to other internships that required a social security number, it allowed young people to be able to like earn enough money to go to college. Trump ran on a platform that on his first day, or in the first 100 days, he was going to take away DACA for these undocumented people, which is really scary. And up until this point, we're sort of in limbo. We don't know what's going to happen. We're sort of on the edge that, we've heard from our national organizations and partners that, oh, hey, at the beginning of his first couple of weeks, it might be tomorrow. It might be the next day after that. And currently, while there have been no changes, and in certain cases he said that he was not going to take away that program anytime soon, we don't necessarily know, which is really unfortunate, and it continues to put a lot of our community members in this, like, am I gonna have this work authorization in the future, in the next couple of days, in the next couple of weeks, in the next couple of months, what about a year? And in terms of, options of how that might sort of end, it could be a flat out, everyone loses DACA as soon as I sign this, everyone, is not able to renew, which again, I sort of mentioned this earlier, it's a renewal process every 2 years. For some folks, you were allowed a 3-year period, or it could be sort of like a sunset date. After a certain date, you no longer are eligible, or DACA isn't eligible.
So just a quick comment on that. The ending it right away, we think shouldn't be possible. There's a provision that for work authorization documents you get with DACA, you have to send out, if you're just going to end them, you have to send out a notice giving people the right to sort of argue on why that shouldn't be taken away. You would lose that argument, but it means sending out 750,000 notices to folks and giving them 30 days to respond. So we think the actual, like, as soon as I sign this is ending is not something that is likely to happen, but rather something more like a sort of you can't renew anymore, and it sort of slowly would die, would be more likely. Again, they couldn't do the other one, but that would still take at least lots of time to process, and then a month to give folks time to get notice. So,
do you want to talk to and sort of what that means?
That was my next question, honestly. So yeah, please do.
Sure. So certainly. Daniel Ramirez is a young man with who has DACA, and he's detained right now in Tacoma at the detention center. And so, our organization and others have brought litigation and have the case against him be dropped because of his deferred action. That case is ongoing in federal court in Seattle. I guess in terms of sort of what the larger message is we think that it sort of shouldn't be, right? I think our hope is that this was sort of an isolated accident to some extent, that eventually the government will come around to its senses and realize that. That certainly has not been the case so far, and they are sort of making allegations in the public without sort of putting forward any evidence, but at this point, we don't think that case is sort of a signal of a bigger change around DACA. And so, we certainly, again, I think, vigilance is a good word, Vanessa, for sort of where we are, right? So we don't know exactly what's going to happen, but I think really making sure that we're aware and sharing information with allies around what we see. And I think one of these things, and I think that, name it, like, how do you, I think, sort of prepare for things without creating panic is sort of one of the conundrums that we're sort of faced at this point. And so I think that, while, Daniel's case is scary and wrong and there's so many problems with it, I think that we're trying to make sure that the message that we're sharing and that what we've seen is that we don't think that this is sort of the first in sort of some attack on DACA. We think this was a mistake, and we think the government's sort of digging themselves in a deeper hole. But we think that as far as we can tell, it's not necessarily a sign of things to come around DACA.
So I guess where I'm at right now is my students come to me and they say, like, "Did you see that lady that got picked up when she went for a protection order? I shouldn't have any interaction with government. I shouldn't go fill out paperwork. I shouldn't. If you were advising students, like, what advice would you give them about how much interaction they should allow themselves to have with structures of government right now?
That's a great question. And I think at least from my perspective, the answer in part depends on whether you're talking about state and local government or whether you're talking about federal government and what the purpose is, right? There is a lot of justified fear out there. In terms of interactions with schools, right? In terms of interacting with teachers, in terms of filling out paperwork for free and reduced lunch, in terms of students going to school on a daily basis. I think that should be one of the safest interactions with government that anybody could possibly have. And I think that it's incumbent on teachers and schools and superintendents and school boards to make that message crystal clear to students. So our state constitution protects the right to education regardless of race, creed. We have a state law against discrimination in schools that protects students from discrimination in schools based on national origin. And then we also have a federal US Supreme Court case from 1976 that says that you cannot deny education based on whether a child legally immigrated to the United States or immigrated without documentation. Kids can't be kept out of schools simply because of their immigration status. And schools can't even have policies that would have a chilling effect on a student's right to access their education. So I'll give you two really concrete examples, right? Schools are not, under Washington law, and I think also under federal law, allowed to routinely collect information about students' immigration status. That should not be in student educational records. And if it is in your student educational records, you should make sure you are no longer collecting that information. So, that alone is a protection. And then the second thing is that schools are directed not to affirmatively and routinely allow for enforcement by immigration officials on school campuses. So for interaction with schools, I would say the message you should be sending students is, this is a safe place, and we are not going to cooperate with immigration officials. I think cooperation with ICE in Washington state would be a violation of the state law against discrimination. It would be a violation of our Constitution. It would be a violation of FERPA. There's just like a laundry list that would be violated by any affirmative cooperation or active engagement with Immigration and Customs. Now I'm going to put a little pin in school police because I think that's a potential area of vulnerability that I want to come back to. Interactions with police generally, I think, are much, much, much more dangerous, particularly in an immigration enforcement regime where there are no priorities. Getting fingerprinted, getting arrested, getting referred for prosecution by law enforcement is one of the quickest ways to end up. So, you know, that is an area that I think folks have a right to be very, very cautious. Now, you have rights and limitations in terms of engagement with police. We have bust cards up there. They're little yellow wallet cards about folks' rights in interacting with police. But that is one of the most risky areas. Courthouses are not protected by the sensitive locations guidance, and so even under the Obama administration, courthouses were an area where some folks conducted immigration enforcement.
Do you want to add to that?
Do you want to go? Touched on this as well, the Washington Student Achievement Council, WASAC, and I think there's a few high school teachers here have also stated that the information obtained through WAFSFA, which is the state financial aid version for financial aid version for undocumented students, that information is not going to be shared. That information is kept private, and that is really important because not only are students' information there, right, in terms name, address, tax information, but in some cases their parents are as well. And so lots of folks were really discouraged, and they were fearful that if they applied to this state financial aid and if they were undocumented, that this information was going to be made public or that there was going to be some sort of repercussion for their family members. So they have made a statement, it's on their website, that they will not be sharing that information with anyone.
Yeah, and I guess just the one piece that I would add is that, and maybe we'll talk about sort of rights that folks have, but I think even in interactions with, I think one of the pieces that we think is actually really important in Washington State is that folks can get identification without having to prove their immigration status, right? So in Washington State, you can get a driver's license or a state ID without having to prove your immigration status, and so. And we think carrying around that form of state ID is a really important way to be able to prove your identity without proving where you're from, right? So the first step in any immigration case is that the government has the burden to prove in alienage, but it's to prove that you weren't born in the United States. So that's the first step. That's the government's burden to prove. And so if you are carrying around ID that shows, or you admit, for example, to a law enforcement officer, or to ICE, or somewhere else that you aren't from, again, you don't have to lie, you just don't answer the question. But in state ID, having state ID to show your identification without proof of where you're from, besides being, I'm from Tacoma, right? That's where I live. I think that's a really important piece. And so in interactions with state government and local government, I think. Places where you don't have to share immigration status, I think we feel like is one way, and with your state ID can be one way to sort of limit risk, right? I mean, I think it's unrealistic to say there isn't risk, right? There is risk if you are undocumented. You are at risk, right? That is it's a lie to say otherwise, but I also think that. That what we can sort of try to do is give information about where those risks can be and how to limit them, and so hopefully we'll share a little bit more.
So I want to do a bit of housekeeping really fast. If you have somebody who you care about who couldn't be here tonight, this is being live streamed by Bootstrapper Studios. And so if you're Twitter acquainted, on my timeline, there's a link to the live stream, and you can share this with other people. I want to do a kind of quick pause for a second, kind of time out. I want you to just turn and talk with people next to you. What's the most important idea you've heard so far you're going to take back and share either at your school or with families?
This is pedagogy 101 thing. That was beautiful. That was very teacher. No, I know.
We should do more of this if we do our presentation.
By the way, I facilitate too. Like if you need me to facilitate something, I got you. I'm $1,000 a day though. All right, so go ahead and finish your thought, please. Finish your thought, please. Thank you. Thank you. Really fast, can I just get maybe 3 people really quickly, most important key thing you've heard so far? 3 quick hands, hopefully near where I'm standing, not far away. 1.
I think a key piece of information that I'm taking away tonight is that WAFSA is a protected place for them to go at this point, because I have a lot of seniors right now that are hesitant to apply for financial aid for school because they're not sure if that's going to lead to problems for them in the future.
2. Back here.
We talked about how you don't have to, am I doing okay? You don't have to identify where you're from in the schools, but the schools are asking the kids, parents, where the children are born, and that puts them at risk.
And 3rd, go there.
Just being diligent about the decisions you make outside of school. Like if you're making stupid decisions, like even smoking pot as a 7th grader, or your older siblings are getting themselves into trouble, they're putting your whole life at risk. Don't do that.
Laid it perfectly. You said, for right now, schools are a safe place. WAFSA is a safe place. State government is safe-ish. Federal government's dicey. Could we talk about, and you mentioned the kind of elephant in the room, school police, local law enforcement. What advice do you have for undocumented students when they encounter law enforcement? So obviously this is ACLU in your wheelhouse, but like, what's your advice?
Before I jump to local law enforcement, can I make a note about the place of birth question? Okay, so FERPA, the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, does not allow schools to disclose stuff in student educational records without parent consent or some very specific exceptions, including if there is a warrant or a judicially issued subpoena. But directory information, which includes name, address, and place of birth, is not, can be disclosed without affirmative parental consent. Directory information has a flipped burden where basically parents have to opt out if the school has a policy of releasing directory information. The #1 immediate change that schools protect their students is establish a district-wide policy not to include place of birth in directory information, and not to release that, because that does, you're right, put students at risk, and it is not cleanly protected by existing laws. But FERPA doesn't require school districts to disclose directory information, and it doesn't require them to include place of birth in that directory information. So that's one immediate policy change that I think, and there's a few other sort of FERPA-related housekeeping matters where I think districts could be more protective. Now, school police. School policing puts kids at risk of immigration consequences, particularly if you have a school policing regime where there are not clean lines between what is considered typical adolescent misconduct, right, which is the kind of stuff that teachers deal with every day, and what is a law enforcement priority that should be referred for arrest, prosecution, police reports. I will tell you that very, very few school districts in Washington have those kinds of clean lines in established policy. And so if you are working in a district that and you should ask what those lines are. Frankly, if you don't know what they are already, that's a pretty good indication that they don't exist, right? Because teachers are often the ones calling police officers or having those initial interactions. So if it hasn't been sort of communicated as a priority, this, not that, then those lines probably don't exist. And they are a matter of practice and personality rather than policy. If schools are referring kids for low-level incidents, theft, fighting, disturbing school, which is still a crime in Washington, and some jurisdictions actually do refer kids for prosecution of the crime of disturbing school. And it gets, you know, the sort of exercise of kids' rights with respect to police gets more complicated in a school environment, right? Because it is much harder to walk away, to turn to an officer and say, am I free to leave? And then walk away if that officer is going to follow you to third period, right? So as a general matter, I think the best advice that you can give students, or anybody, frankly, when interacting with police is to do the following. First question, am I free to leave? If the answer to that question is yes, leave. If the answer to that question is no, say, I want to talk to a lawyer. And then zip and say nothing at all until you get access to a lawyer. Not your mom, not your best, most amazing teacher friend, a lawyer. Because if
say
you
that again, like, because this is super. This
Yep.
is like probably my most important.
Yep.
Say that again, please.
Yep. So students should be told, asked to speak to a lawyer, not their mom, not their friend, not their mentor, not their teacher. The person they should request is, I want to speak to a lawyer. Even if they don't have their own lawyer, the government has to provide them with a lawyer at no cost. There are public defenders on call 24 hours a day in every single jurisdiction in Washington state. So the answer is, you know, if you're told, I'm not free to leave, then I want to speak to a lawyer. The reason it's important to ask for a lawyer and not your mom or a mentor is because if you ask for your mom or a mentor, the police can keep questioning you. If you ask for a lawyer, they have to stop questioning you. And they can talk to you still, but they can't question you. So if a person is suspected of a crime, ask for a lawyer, zip, done. Not another word, not another sound. Even if the officer wants to talk about the Mariners or how great the Seahawks season is, not another word, not another sound.
Yeah, great question. And I was, yeah, you sort of, you know, cringe. So no, right? So sort of while. Oh, sorry. The question was whether or not you get a lawyer in an immigration case, if the government, and the answer is no. Sort of somewhat crazily, the government won't provide you with an attorney if you can't afford one in your immigration case. So a vast majority in detention, and an awful lot of people, even who aren't detained, go forward as their own lawyers in immigration cases. So I think that, you know, the advice was around, if sort of first that police interaction, right? So I think that's where we are right now, right? School police, local police, law, you know, that angle, right? Like, what do you do? And I think I think a lot of the advice is similar with immigration. We'll get to that, but let's stay on the local police. But a great question, because it is definitely a difference.
Thing I wanted to flag on local police is it's really important to know whether the police who are in your building come from a department that has a policy of either asking about immigration status or cooperating with local law enforcement. Now, someone mentioned the 287G program earlier, which is basically deputizing local law enforcement to act as immigration enforcement. The Trump administration's executive orders indicated a desire to expand 287G. It's a voluntary program, which means jurisdictions don't have to participate, and to my knowledge, no one in Washington is actively in. But if that program gets ramped up and then you have local law enforcement who are deputized on 287G and then also in schools, I think that runs you into massive constitutional problems. And then there are some local law enforcement who still do ask about immigration status. And we certainly saw, not in Washington state, but the ACLU saw in other parts of the country, school police asking about immigration status, and then actively referring students to ICE. And in some cases, removing students from the school grounds to meet up with ICE off campus, which is, I think, again, highly questionable under Plyler versus Doe, and would be incredibly, I think, questionable under the Washington law against discrimination. But if you have police in your schools, you should know what department are they from, does that department have a policy of asking students about immigration enforcement, and again, fixing and creating better policy around school policing, just generally, but also with respect to this area, is another major area where schools can protect students now.
And I think I just want to go back a little bit with what Tim and Vanessa were stating about the lack of legal representation in immigration cases, right? There are young people, as you know, really, really young, who are, you know, they have to defend themselves against judges, against, you know, ICE and police. And that's something that I want you all to think of, right? Like, you all work with young people. Imagine them going into an immigration court and having to defend themselves. And that is really important. And sort of like a little plug, one of the big campaigns that we're gonna try to push for is citywide legal defense funds. And that is super important because we need to ensure that these young people, and also our older undocumented population as well, are getting the legal representation that they need and are not being, you know, signing their own deportation orders to go back to a country that, you know, they've never even known, or that they're fleeing from some sort of violence. So just think of that, right? Like, these students do not have legal representations, or there's not a mandate for them to have legal representation.
Yeah, and I can just add a little bit. Our organizations and others, one of our big, or it was one of our big ones, there's now lots of other ones as well, but big litigation suits has been suing for the right to counsel for kids, right? So you know, and it's really, I mean, 5-year-olds are their own lawyers in immigration court. You know, the one of the top immigration judges in the country who the government selected to be deposed, right? So to swear under oath about these things, testified that he's taught 3- and 4-year-olds immigration law, which is sort of horrifying. So you know, the sort of status on representation is terrifying. The difference it makes is incredible, right? So there's data out of New York where they actually do have a citywide legal defense fund in New York City. It's kind of amazing. I think it's a nice model. But you know, where they actually have full representation, right, for folks in detention fighting their cases. And the success rate there is about 30%, right, which is still rough. But unrepresented folks had a success rate of about 3%, right? So it increases by 1,000% your chances of winning an immigration case and defending yourself if you have a lawyer, right? Just that fact. So it's a hugely important thing, I think, pushing local, and you know, we do what we can. We have, you know, 1,500 people in the detention center. We have about 8 lawyers, right? So not something that we can do for everyone. And so yeah, I think, you know, just to sort of, we can try to shift into sort of what you do if immigration stops you. You know, I think, again, the answer is not that different, right? I think that you still say you want to talk to a lawyer and you just don't talk, right? I mean, I think, you know, you then have to find a lawyer, right? But, you know, you don't get one appointed for you. But if you just don't answer those initial questions, and I think in Washington State, you don't have to state your name. And I think that's a pretty important point for a lot of people, right? Where we've seen the most immigration enforcement, and at least this initial sort of push in these last few weeks, has been with folks who already have contact with immigration, right? So they're pushing with folks who have a deportation order from before, right? So maybe they came to the U.S., you know, when they were 12, and you know, and they were scheduled for court, they missed court, you know, they were 12, and so they have this deportation order now sort of outstanding. So their name is on some list in some dark cave where ICE lives, and you know, and they're sort of working their way down that, and so they're going to look for people, and so even their name, right, that alone may be enough to sort of get them, and so I think not giving name is important, and like we talked about before, right, not admitting where you're from, right, and you know, they're good at asking those questions in different ways, right? Well, when did you come to the United States, right? Like, you know, it's not the question about where I was born, right? But that may in and of itself, right, give away that I wasn't born here, right? So really trying to make sure that folks know, right? Just don't answer those questions, and then again trying to talk to a lawyer. And what we've seen, right, in terms of sort of what has happened and what is different now is that they're going and looking for individuals who they know about, who they've had contact with before, or someone who's had contact with the criminal justice system. But then the difference now is that people in the same sort of place go and pull over a car. And now instead of just going for, for Bob, the driver, who they're after, they're going after the other passengers in the car, right? Or they're looking for someone and they go knock on the door in the house, someone lets them in, and then all of a sudden they're going after other people there, right? Even though those weren't the people they were looking for. And so, again, staying silent, and not saying things. I think certainly at a house situation, right, not opening that door is another big piece of advice. And I'm sure Vanessa could talk even more, but not opening that door is a really, really, really important piece. You open the door if there's a judicial warrant. In practice, ICE has not been getting judicial warrants. They get these things that they call warrants, administrative warrants, which essentially is like if you just ask your office mate, like, would you sign this, please? And they write the word warrant at the top, right? It's sort of a make-believe thing. But it doesn't give you the same rights that a judicially signed warrant does. And so you don't have to open the door for that.
Yeah, and I think along with that, part of what our organization does is Know Your Rights campaign, Know Your Rights, and we actually go into community and undocumented immigrant communities and into their homes to really create sort of like a roundtable discussion of what are your rights, right? We strongly believe that a safe community is an informed community and a community that knows their rights. And ICE is deceptive, right? They are out to do a job. They are out to do this and to terrorize our communities, right? And so the main thing is, and something that you all can do is really share this accurate information. Oftentimes people out of their good heart spread false information that really ends up harming the community in detrimental manners, right? So I think they both touched on, do not open your doors unless you have a warrant. You have to absolutely exercise your right to remain silent. And yes.
Wait, Jenna, we're going to do Q&A. I promise, Jenna. And we'll go to you early. I promise. You want to finish your thought? Or?
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely. So exercise the right to remain silent. Oftentimes a simple question as can lead into a conversation that can ultimately, accidentally slip that, oh, hey, I am undocumented, or, oh, hey, my neighbor is undocumented, or my uncle, my cousin, my family member is undocumented. Make sure that you're also telling folks to not sign anything. We have heard stories that oftentimes, folks are signing their own deportation orders, and, with that, their, deportation proceeding is faster, you go on and you never see those community members again. Also for folks, especially those who are citizens and allies, we encourage you all to record any sort of interaction that you see ICE having within the community members. Documentation is really key, and I'm just going to go a little bit further also with any sort of police violence or brutality as well. And report your encounter, create deportation defense committees, right? Do you and your group of neighbors know what to do? Can y'all rally behind and call the Department of Homeland Security to, let your neighbor go? Are you willing to have a press conference to bring and shed light into these communities, right? You are all in a state where you can organize and you can mobilize and you could create real change for real people. And part of that is knowing your rights and making sure that you are informing others of their rights. But another portion of that is to organize and to resist, right? To resist the terrorization of ICE, to resist the real threats that a lot of our community members are facing.
Well, and a plug for your organization. So you're a part of United We Dream, right? And so they actually have some really awesome posters that you can download online, and they're in 5 languages. And so on my classroom door,
9.
What was that?
9. We're currently updating.
Oh, sorry.
more.
I have it in 5. So on my door, I have a sign that has all the advice she just gave in English, Spanish, Korean, Arabic, and Chinese. Thank you. We've kind of tackled the question, what should people do, what should students do if they are in contact with immigration. How about us as the adults? So you've said like they're not going to, as of right now, they're not going to come into our schools. But let's say I'm going to get a burger at Burger Broiler in McKinley, and I see ICE. What can I do? Well, what should I do, like morally, and what can I do legally?
That is an incredibly fact-dependent question. And so there's the polls, right? The moral teacher, like, these are my kids and how dare you, right? Part of you that's one side, right? And then the other side is that it remains a federal crime to harbor, and it's such an offensive law. It remains a federal crime to harbor a person who should be deported, right? And how that gets defined is, again, incredibly fact specific. My advice is always to make sure that you are standing as an ally to folks who are in contact with law enforcement. That doesn't mean that you need to obstruct what's going on, but making sure that you're asking folks, do you feel safe? Do you know what's going on? Can I help you in any way? Is not obstructing law enforcement activities, right? So the same thing that you would do if you saw a police officer who was not an immigration officer hassling a kid on the street, I think would be the same things that I would advise folks to do in this context as well. But how you play that situation depends a lot on who, what, when, where, how.
So now we're going to go to questions, and I'm going to take my microphone, and I'm going to find one of my teachers to work this side of the room, and then Monique's on this side of the room. I'm going to ask you to abide by the international rules of Q&A. Don't preach, please. Ask a question, keep it short, and that way we can get as many questions answered as possible.
I just have a clarifying question. I don't think it's on. Is it on? It should be.
Here, so let's start over here. We'll see.
So, hello. Okay. So, you said that ICE has not been getting judicial warrants, and as a family member, how is somebody supposed to understand what that means? Is there a number that they can be like, oh yeah, you have a judicial warrant. Hold on, let me call and check on that. I mean, like, what can we advise our families to do in that situation if that happens to them?
So, if you have a question, you just stand up. Please, terrible. But you all heard that, right?
Yeah.
Could you repeat the question and the answer when you answer?
Yes, so the question was how, and it's a good one, is how, sorry, I mentioned judicial warrants versus sort of the sort of fake administrative warrants. How do you tell the difference, right? Or how would you inform someone about telling that difference?
Judicial warrants will have the name of a judge and an actual court on the top. So it'll say something like in the Eastern District of Washington or in King County Superior Court, right? Administrative warrants.
Yeah, don't say that. And you know, if you look actually at our website, so NWIRP.org, there's a Know Your Rights tab, or info, and then Know Your Rights, and there's a whole lot of information there. But some of them, I think there have been some materials up there that post sort of pictures of some samples, so you can see at least what some administrative warrants look like. But yeah, I think the point of, you know, a judge's name, a judge's signature, and a court name is going to sort of give that away.
Another sort of quick and easy reference point for whether the officers at the door are federal law enforcement versus state law enforcement. Under the Washington State Constitution, if an officer is asking you to open the door, they also have to inform you that you have the right to refuse to let them in. And so if an officer is knocking on your door and saying, like, will you let me in, I just want to chat with you, which is a lot of times what they will try to do to get your quote unquote consent to let you in. Under Washington state law enforcement officers can't do that unless they also inform you that you have the right to refuse consent. So if an officer is not informing you that you have the right to refuse to talk to them, that's a decent tip-off that they may be a federal law enforcement officer.
So just to clarify, if they come with an administrative, have the name of a judge, I do not have to open the door.
Correct.
Hypothetically.
Yeah, don't open the door. Yeah, and again, I mean, that is really hugely important, right? So administrative warrant, does not give them a right to enter without consent, and so without opening that door, there's no consent for them to come in, and so they can't come in. Now again, I mean, ICE may wait outside, but they can't come in, and I think that really, besides giving time for various things to happen, it also ensures that the other people inside the house, right, are not put in danger by immigration officers coming in and then sort of being able to ask lots and lots of questions.
And really, really quickly, along with that, also be really vigilant, right? I think that that's a terrific word that I haven't used, and it really like perfectly explains it. Make sure that your community members know as well, right? So make sure your family knows, like give them a heads up. Hey, like a potential like ICE person is at my door. Make sure that your neighbors know, and make sure that you spread that information in a way that does not cause panic. Which is really, really key, right? And this is why often it's really great to empower communities to empower themselves that already have like that trust built within their own communities, but it's also really important to spread that information as well.
So when it comes to these warrant situations, is it required if the family doesn't speak English to provide them with a translator, or is that not a thing?
Not a thing.
Okay.
Hi, I have a question that I really want people with passive income or a big savings to listen to the answer to. So let's say that you're doing a cost-benefit analysis. What's the sentence for harboring somebody who could get picked up by ICE? Like let's just say some people are willing to take that risk, hypothetically. What might that risk look like in exchange for a human life? I'm just asking.
I can't technically advise people to break the law. I don't remember off the top of my head. I think it's a federal misdemeanor level offense. So the other thing, though, I will say is that there's a well-established movement of sort of religious-based sanctuary that I think has additional potential protections beyond the individual level. So if folks are interested in that, you know, starting to tap into the sanctuary churches movement would be a great place to start getting information. Did I walk that line there? Yeah, okay.
What's the consequence, or to what extent does the Department of Homeland Security guidance have the full effect of law? If ICE doesn't follow that guidance, what are the consequences?
Not much. Yeah. There's no, so it's just internal guidance. So so there isn't sort of enforceability there.
I think that you could enforce it through other, right? I
agree. I think that there's sort of public pressure that would probably play a major role in that. And then obviously each individual case may have its own sort of individual, trying to sort of stop the deportation on an individual case could be a possibility. But I think that in and of itself, that guidance doesn't provide its own enforceability like a law would.
I mean, and the guidance itself says that individuals can't sue to enforce the guidance, but I think you could potentially file constitutional lawsuits, depending on the facts of how ICE was acting in the schools and also what degree of cooperation or affirmative engagement the school provided. As a matter of best practice, I think if you teacher first, you should make just like you would at a house. Two, you should ask them for their legal authority for what it is they think they're doing there, right? Do they have a judicial warrant? Probably not. Do they even have an administrative warrant? Are they looking for a particular student? Do they have reason to believe that student is on this campus? I would then call your superintendent and get your district's lawyer on the phone. And I would also ask them why they are violating the sensitive locations guidance, because the guidance itself lays out some criteria for when they would potentially, go against their own internal guidance, a terrorism suspect, a destruction of evidence of an ongoing criminal investigation. If none of those factors are present, then I think that gives you some more room to push back, whether it's going and invoking higher ups in ICE, because this may just be one rogue agent, or whether it is to bring public pressure to bear. So I would, as an administrator and a teacher, feel fully empowered based on my constitutional obligations to my students to stop that person at the door and get more information and talk to the district's lawyers before allowing them to proceed any further.
Does the sensitive locations protect students and community members when they're not at school but are at school events such as field trips and sporting events?
It does, yes, but it does not protect people in transit.
But if they're at the event that's
Yes.
school sponsored, even if it's outside of school,
Yes,
they're protected?
yes, it protects school events.
Sorry, just as an addendum, does school bus transportation count or no?
The guidance itself says that school bus transportation counts. That said, the little asterisk is that there have been reported incidents even before this most recent round of enforcement of students getting picked up maybe at the bus stop, maybe on their way to the bus stop, depends on who you ask. But the bus itself, right, once you physically board that bus, should be fine.
I have a quick question. Besides the lawyer that they would contact, is there like a crisis number that they could call? I'm looking around on the paperwork and trying to find like one number. If I could give my kids one phone number to call that would like rally a whole bunch of people and resources at once, does that exist?
I don't know the number on top of my head, but United We Dream, again, we're an affiliate of United We Dream, has amazing resources and a program called Migra Watch, which in Spanish, Migra means ICE. And they do have that information. So maybe I can like post it on the events page or send that information over to Nate.
And for everybody in the room, just a heads up, all of the documents they're talking about and all the handouts they're talking about, I'm going to put electronic copies of on the event page and also my personal website. I'm going to build a page on natebowling.com, student immigration, that'll have all the information as well.
There's a question streaming online from a viewer that says, what about when our superintendent says, do whatever ICE tells you to do? How should we respond?
I would encourage folks to have additional dialogue with the superintendent about the basis for that. And there is a, again, I do think that your obligations to at least ask questions to ICE are grounded in the law, right? This isn't just sort of airy-fairy, like I want to be kind, right? You have a legal obligation to ensure that all children, regardless of their immigration status, are able to attend school on equal footing. And that means not turning your school into a site of immigration enforcement, right? The courts have actually said that this isn't, I'm not just making this up, I'll cite you the court cases. And if you want to have that discussion on very specific terms, there are a whole host of districts, both locally and nationally, that have adopted some variety of welcoming schools, safe school zones, model K-12 resolutions, policies. I've got sort of a national model right here. I can collect for you all. I've been collecting, and I can share my collection with you. And I'm also happy to help groups of teachers or students adapt those to what is useful for your particular context. So if you want to go to the superintendent and say, I don't think we should be sending the message, do whatever ICE tells you, and in fact, I would rather you sent this message instead, I'm happy to help folks draft that message.
Really quickly, as a community organizer, I'm gonna tell you all to organize, 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 right? Like, that's where my background is, that's where collective power is. And as teachers, you all stand in sort of this unique position, right? I'm sure you're all part of a union, correct? Awesome, right? Like, sort of unions have traditionally had a history of like, yeah, it's sort of like a transactional, like I pay you dues, you give me something back in return, right? Benefits, better pay, et cetera, et cetera. But also, unions are now starting to shift a narrative of advocating for values and advocating for human dignity, right? And so you all are standing in this sort of hub of organizing, and I want you all to take advantage of that. So if you don't see that the administration, whether it's at your local school, whether it's on superintendent, level, cause havoc, right? And like, I can say that because I'm a community organizer, cause havoc, put public pressure, right? Make them commit to sending out a statement that protects undocumented students. It just blows my mind when some folks don't understand that undocumented people also put into the educational system. Every single time, right, whether it's mortgage, whether it's rent, we are paying property taxes that go back into the educational system. We have a standing outside the inherent dignity of us all, right? But like, also use that messaging, use that leverage to really put pressure on those folks that need to be given pressure at.
Speaking of
unions, I wanted to actually speak for Tacoma School District. They put out a statement about undocumented families, and they're pretty strong. And I also want to point out that the president of the Tacoma School Board was here until she had to leave for another meeting. So they're trying to do what's right, and they're very clear that they don't want you to let go of any of your kids. If somebody comes to your building and asks for one of your students, you call the legal department downtown. And that's just 571-1000, can I have the legal department, please? And they will work with you to figure out the right way to proceed. But TPS is pretty solid that they want to protect all their students.
So back to organizing. It's an election year in Tacoma as far as the city council. We're getting 5 new city council members, a new mayor, and a new executive. So how can we make not collaborating with ICE in our departments? Any policy suggestions that you can give us that we can be pushing on these very enthusiastic new members of our government?
That's a big one. I have lots of opinions, y'all. I think, let me broaden that to not only here in our city council, but to other city councils as well. I think, like I said, right, creating a legal defense fund is one of our top priorities, and is really like ensuring a must that folks have at least legal representation to make sure that their livelihoods are not at risk. Welcoming cities, sanctuary cities, and instituting that at a citywide level. Our hope is to make sure that like every city across the state has some sort of policies that prevents ICE and local police collaboration. Oh, I wasn't prepared for this question.
Can I throw in on, throwing in on the welcoming cities, sanctuary cities issue, another thing I would flag, right, is also just the degree of policing, right? Even if you call yourself a welcoming or sanctuary city, if you're still picking up tens of thousands of people for driving with license suspended in the 3rd degree, and referring all of those cases for prosecution, you're going to end up with the paradoxical effect of still tagging a whole bunch of folks for immigration enforcement. So I think that criminal justice reform and immigration advocacy here go hand in hand.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that sometimes the language around sort of what sort of welcoming cities or sanctuary, whatever you want to call them, right? I think sometimes the sort of rhetoric around it, right, doesn't match. I think from both sides, right? I think from people who are pushing the sanctuary movement and folks who are pushing against it, I think both sides sort of make it sound like it does maybe more than it does, and you know, I mean, I think when there is criminal justice contact, right, that information just gets shared with immigration, right? So that's not a question of like, are they collaborating, right? And so, you know, the sort of most liberal welcoming city resolutions, right, don't stop that. You know, they stop an officer, at least in theory, they tell the officer not to pick up the phone and call ICE, but when they run those fingerprints, they get sent to the FBI, and then that gets shared with ICE. So that information is getting shared when there is an arrest. So So I think that, you know, Vanessa's point that there is this really tight connection, right, is really, really important. And so when we're thinking about sort of policy changes, right, that's certainly a really, really important one.
We're going to do one more from the audience.
Better be good.
Or not. That's fine too. Okay, so I want to just close with this. What's one thing, what's one thing that you would like people in this room to do on behalf, so from each of your point of views, working with the students, ACLU, working with NERP, what's one thing you want this room to do that can help you help our students?
Thanks, no pressure. I think, right, coming from a community organizing background, I want you all to commit that once you leave this room, to protect undocumented people, to protect undocumented families, and also, I don't think we touched on this enough, mixed status families as well. Because some of children that were born here and who are citizens are, you know, going home crying, having detrimental mental health, emotional, well-being problems because they are fearing that their parents, that their, you know, family members or guardians are going to be deported, that this hateful rhetoric is affecting our children, right? So we need to really understand that this is holistically, that, you know, we need folks on the front lines battling legal issues, providing adequate representation on the national level. ACLU is doing a phenomenal job, but we also need to ensure that as a community, we are actually working as a community to cohesively push forward an agenda, whether it's policies, whether it's, you know, statements from superintendents that protect undocumented students. Also, that you all commit to going out and sharing that information. We can't do it alone. It's virtually impossible for us to do it alone. And as immigrant rights organizations, we sort of hit the ground running. Lots of folks are burning out. We want to do the right thing, but we need to ensure that we're also getting your help as well. So you're in a really, really great state because you're with, you know, kids, you're with a great population. There's 250,000 undocumented people in Washington state alone. We want to reach those 250,000 undocumented people in Washington state, and as schools and as, you know, educators, as school support staff, as school administration, you all have one of the best frontline direct contact with the populations that we are trying to hit and we're trying to protect.
So I have lawyer hat on this, and then I also have sort of former teacher hat. So my lawyer hat, right, would encourage folks to really look at your school's policies and procedures in minute, incredibly nerdy detail around things like information sharing, communication with ICE. I do think that the Welcoming Schools resolution that the school board adopted is a good first step, but I think more specifics, even if it's just putting on paper stuff that's already in practice, makes it so much easier for everybody in the school to do their best every day and to ensure that there's consistency and cohesion. My former teacher and my parent hat on this wants you to empower your students to be part of the movement to do the right thing here, however you define that, right? And I think some of that is acknowledging and responding to the trauma of this moment, because it is incredibly traumatic. For students, it's traumatic. For teachers, it's traumatic for parents, right? And adopting a sort of trauma-informed lens to that is necessary to helping to move folks towards empowerment and resistance. And I think part of that is navigating the very fine line between let's not all panic, but let's pay really close attention to what's going on. And you all are incredibly well positioned to do that, and I'm so glad you're here.
Those are tough acts to follow. I guess I have, I think first is thank you for being here, right? I mean, I think you have done an important step by coming. And I hope that you continue to learn more about this, right? So there's lots of resources that were handed out. Again, I think our website has a pretty nice compendium of various things that you could look at. I would also just in a maybe incredibly wonky lawyer way push just for a small, there's an immigration protection called Special Immigrant Juvenile Status. It's for kids right now in Washington State who are under 18 and who have been abandoned, abused, or neglected by one or both their parents. And so, you know, it's a protection that for kids who might not have other options, can be a really important protection. But again, you age out of it, right? At 18, can lead to a green card. It's really kind of amazing. As an immigration lawyer, it's one of these sort of things that you sort of are always hoping that folks might qualify for. Of course, meaning that they've gone through sort of rough times in the past. But you know, so I just, there isn't enough information out there about special immigrant juvenile status. There's more information on our website if you need to learn more. But I would just, you know, as teachers, you're in this position, and I know you don't want to sort of be asking your kids, are you undocumented? Hey, I got some information. But I just think knowing about this and having information available, if or something like that, I just think that, you know, the more we push, the more, you know, we think that there are folks who are eligible for this, and we just want to make sure that information is being shared. So please, you can learn more. You can ask me later. I'm happy to stick around and talk to folks and share more about that.
All three panelists are going to stick around. I just want, from the bottom of my heart, thank you all for coming out tonight. These are very tough times. And what I feel right now, more than ever right now, is that I'm not alone, and you're not alone in this. And if I'm not alone and we're not alone, that means our students aren't alone. And so our job is to go back to our buildings, to share this information with our buildings, to push our administrators, to talk to the office ladies, to talk to the students, and provide a safe place. And this is a town hall that we're having, but this isn't the end of this work at all. And so I just want to thank you all for coming out tonight. Like this, our city is rising on behalf of our kids, and that's what they deserve and what it should be. So thank you. All right, so very quickly, just thank you to Adam Weigel for streaming this online. Thanks to the Union for Space, and thanks to you all. Have a great night.